Hello, QCon. I'm so delighted that I'm going to be chairing an amazing panel for you. So I've had the privilege of studying high-performing technology organizations since 1999, and that was a journey that started for me back when I was a CTO and founder of a company called Tripwire in the information security and compliance space. And so our goal was to study these amazing organizations that had the best project due date performance, the best operational stability and reliability, as well as the best posture of security and compliance. And so as you can imagine, in a 21-year journey, there were many surprises. But by far, the biggest surprise was how it took me into the middle of the DevOps movement, which I think is urgent and important. And in that journey, maybe a particularly huge surprise was my learning about the importance of architecture, that architecture was one of the top predictors of performance, even larger of a predictor than even continuous delivery. And I think what is so amazing is that it's architecture that really dictates to what extent teams can work independently. To what extent can they develop, test, and deploy value to their customers without being coupled to potentially scores of other teams? And I know that architecture is a particularly favorite topic here within the QCon community. And so when Randy Schaub asked me if I'd be willing to chair a panel on the subject, I jumped at the chance because I wanted to explore these topics more deeply with two people whose achievements I deeply admire. Karen Meyer and Mike Nygaard. So before I jump into my questions, could each of you briefly introduce yourselves and tell us what you're working on these days? Karen, can we start with you?
Sure. I am a data engineer right now at Reify Health, and I'm also the author of Living Closure. And I'm very interested lately in the closure, data science, machine learning areas.
Right. It's now leveraging the Python amazing library of ecosystem of libraries, rather. Mike, how about you?
So I am currently SVP of Platform and Architecture at Sabre, where I'm helping this company through a digital transformation and turnaround. The subject of architecture and coupling is very much on my mind every single day at Sabre. I've also been a developer for a long time, and in fact, Karen and I were colleagues at Cognitect, where we were both working in Closure, and we got to partner on a pretty amazing project, building a desktop IDE for building games using Closure, which is not exactly considered the sweet spot for Closure, but it worked exceedingly well in that situation.
And by the way, I saw that video. The name of that editor is called
Defold.
Defold. That's right. Fantastic. So, I think maybe to kick this off, we're going to talk about what productivity, focus, flow, and joy look like in the large. But maybe we could talk about first in the small, at the individual level. What could you both talk about when coding was most fun for you, and maybe even let's explore the opposite. When was it also the least fun for you? And maybe talk about the factors of what made it so fun, and what specific factors made it so not fun. Karen, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I would say I've been doing programming for quite a while, but it became really fun once I started coding in Closure. I think that is a lot due to the nature of the language and how fast you can get feedback and how, I guess, close you feel to the code. So you can really interact with it and almost kind of sculpt it and the data. And that really makes it a pleasure to work with during the day. And it's very productive too. It kind of gets rid of all the boilerplate, and you can just focus on the real problems. So when I'm working with Closure is one factor. I also like to explore and do a little bit of research. So I guess that really attracts me to the data science machine learning realm, because there's always something new and to explore, and novel applications that can help businesses and just people.
In fact, one of the things I really admire about your work is it's so clear that you're really on the frontier of some of these problem domains in terms of solutions that are being developed across a very wide surface area of technologies. Am I overstating the case?
Well, I do like to read like the latest papers that come out, and and old papers too. But it's always nice to see, what problem could that solve? It's a new way of thinking about it, and this new tool could open up possibilities that we haven't thought about before, and that's really exciting to me.
Great. And before we go to Mike, I just want to concretize some of the things I heard. So some of the things I heard was fast feedback on your work. So you get really fast feedback in terms of whether something's working or not. And I know in one of our conversations, you said just how miserable you are when it takes a long time to get feedback. And by long feedback cycles, you were talking about minutes. Not hours, not days. The fact that it even took minutes. Am I recalling that correctly, Karen?
Yeah, I get a little down when I have to do my Docker builds and deploys. That takes a little long. So, but it's for a greater cause, building out your pipeline. But I'd much prefer to be in my REPL.
Creating immutable build artifacts, right? That's important. But it does amaze me that when you have 4, 5, 6, 7 minute build times, that actually does suck the joy out of our work. Awesome. Mike, does that resonate with you? And tell us about what specific times when you were having just a lot of fun and versus not fun.
Yeah, well, first of all, waiting on Docker build or anything else that's over sort of that 1 minute threshold, like it's time enough to flip away and go look at social media and get angry and stressed out and depressed. And it kind of forces you off task. The times I've enjoyed most have been the ones where kind of like the project I worked on with Karen, aside from the fact she's just a joy to work with, it was a project that we were working on all the time. Like we were focused on it, really focused. The previous projects I've enjoyed most, there was a project for photo studios where we were in a full XP lab situation. We controlled our equipment. We had our OS builds. They were ours. We controlled our build infrastructure. And it's not that we were control freaks so much, it's just that it allowed us to cut off all those external dependencies and really focus on the work itself. And there were times when, we would joke about whether this was a 1 can of Pringles problem or a 2 can of Pringles problem. But what it really meant was, is this something we're going to get done in a morning in the sort of short block? Is it an afternoon, or is it like an afternoon and an evening? And sometimes you'd get into that state of flow and suddenly realize, it was a 2 can of Pringles problem because it was 9 o'clock and that was dinner. Not great on the health front, but it was a really enjoyable experience because, we were able to work together, work closely, and create everything we needed to create. So I think that's one of the ideals you wrote about around locality,
right?
And we really had that. Those are the times that I've enjoyed the most.
And then locality was really meant to suggest to what extent can an individual or team do what they need to do, like by themselves, without having to open up tickets with potentially 15, 20 different teams. And Mike, you had shared a story about like your least fun moment. It was can you describe what that looked like and what are the factors that made that so frustrating and miserable?
Oh, I don't even remember which example I used before. Because
let me remind you, it was a floor with 300 people on it.
Yes.
Tables.
I figured it was either that or one other. No, it was a vast project. It was late and getting later, and so their solution to solving the late project was to add another 100 people. They had emptied out a floor of a bank and had rows of folding tables with all of us in there. The team was strictly organized by layers of the application. So we had a persistence team that had no idea what the domain needed. We had a domain team that had no idea what the users needed. We had a presentation layer team that also didn't know what the users needed. And so we were all kind of trying to model the world while also managing these vertical dependencies that were just changing all the time. Yeah, it was a tough slog.
And so just to, again, concretize that. So the fact that you had these teams organized, whether it was technology or it meant that anything that you need to implement from the user's perspective, from the customer's perspective, was now smeared across those teams. And
exactly
that
so.
involved communication, coordination, prioritization, sequencing. These are the things that suck.
Big documents, lots of meetings.
Interesting. And so one of the, I'll be the first to admit that I'm pretty fussy and sometimes impatient. And so when Karen brings up the notion of, I'm sorry, was it the intolerable 4-minute build times? Could we just talk a little bit about to what extent really that is, tolerable or not tolerable? I mean, when Karen brings that story, it reminds me of like one of the most miserable experiences I've had as a developer, which was trying to get something working in OAuth. And I'll admit OAuth isn't my favorite thing to do, but what made it so frustrating was that the build and deploy times was about 7 minutes. And so, to me, this was just an exercise in trial and error, and that every trial would take 7 minutes. I just found myself 2 hours later in a pretty wretched state. I was no longer thinking clearly. And I found that, I don't remember exactly what I did, but I got a more representative environment on my dev laptop. And suddenly I could, find out if something works within 7 seconds. And suddenly I could now be much more deliberate and productive in terms of actually fixing the problem. So on a scale of 1 to 10, can you just react to that? 1 is that is creating childish impatience and your inability to actually work methodically through a problem. Or 10 is like, no, this is actually of concern, because those are conditions that any developer would actually be difficult to be productive in. Mike?
Well, I don't want to belittle a 7-minute delay, but somebody's always got a worse story, right? And I vividly remember C++ projects that would take 2 hours to compile, or even overnight. I mean, sometimes you would commit your code and you'd come back the next morning to see if the nightly build succeeded or not.
Right.
So to the extent that all of those delay feedback, they delay learning, they make it harder for you to adapt the software to what it wants to be and to what your users need it to be, they're all bad. There's a really interesting kind of cutoff point to me, somewhere between 10 minutes to 30 minutes, where people start to bend their whole workflow around the build times, right? If you only get 3 builds a day, then you sort of plan your work around those builds, which has its own set of issues, right? But there's something uniquely irritating about those medium-sized chunks, because they're too big to ignore, but too little to really switch modes into something else and kind of get your head in a different space.
Right. Karen, how about you?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with it. Trying to minimize it, and whatever that means to you. I mean, when you're annoyed. So when that time frame is for you, you should try to do something about it. One of the most recent times that we had to deal with that was an extremely annoying one that made me post a Hulk GIF, because it enraged me so much every time it happened. So it was in the middle of our Docker build. Randomly, we would have it building a jar and the jar be corrupt for just, one of those, you have no idea why. It randomly happened, but it was rage inducing, because then again, you'd have to lose, 10 minutes. So it kind of got pushed to the back burner until it finally, as these things happen, you decide to do something about it. So I think one approach is to time box it. Say, look, I am going to take a day and try to time box fixing this corrupt jar problem. And in the long run, it is going to make everything run a lot smoother, make everybody a lot happier, less Hulk GIFs in Slack. And I think that's a good way to put the investment. We did solve it, which was nice. But there's always something like that, right? That kind of gets pushed to the back burner because it doesn't happen all the time, but it makes your cycle time longer. And, you've got to
impact everybody, right? It has global impact, right? Everyone who's incorporating code, doing benefiting from builds, right, is benefits from this improvement.
What I find really interesting about it, though, is people don't get upset about it. unless they know it doesn't have to be that way. If they think that that lost time is just the way the world is, then there's no emotion about it. It's just the way the world is.
Right.
But if you come into that project from somewhere else and you're like, my God, your unit tests take 10 minutes to run. Like, what are you, savages? How do you live like this? You get that level of dissatisfaction, and then pretty soon something has to get done about it. So sometimes it takes an example from outside to say, actually, this thing is not a fact of the universe. It is an artifact of the way you're working or the technology you're working in.
I love that. And by the way, like one of the in the Unicorn project, I mean, I think these kind of concepts that are contrarian, counterintuitive, maybe even crazy sounding. One of them to me was the notion of like where we put our best developers. And so like if you look at the tech giants, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, they put their best developers, the most experienced developers on dev productivity, the next most experienced developers on backend services, and then probably the most junior developers on the user-facing features. Whereas in most large complex enterprises, it's the exact opposite. They put developers on the features, the next most experienced developers on backend services, and then they end up putting their summer interns on dev productivity and build systems, which is, I think, exactly not what you want, right? For the reasons that you cited there. So, one of the other things that made me so excited to talk to both of you is our common love for functional programming, and in particular, one functional programming language called Clojure, which has already been mentioned many times. Can you talk about how important you think functional programming techniques and principles are for the everyday programmer? In other words, is it only for the senior engineers and architects as represented here within the QCon community, or is there something in it for junior programmers as well? I'll put that out for both of you. Whoever speaks first.
I think it's much too powerful and fun for the frontline developers. It should be reserved for wizards who've ranked up a few times.
That's right, because it's finite. Only so many people can use it at one time. Mike, why would you say such a thing? You said it's powerful. What makes it so powerful?
Yeah. So we have to unpack a little bit what we mean by functional programming. And I'm not going to try and pull up multiple academic definitions, but generally speaking, we're talking about languages that favor immutable values, which just make entire classes of problem disappear. There are also languages that favor building functions out of other functions. And so you get this effective leverage where you can create increasingly powerful abstractions to avoid repetitive boilerplate kind of code. So for me, those are two of the features that I really cherish.
And to what extent can they be benefited by even junior programmers, or is this only reserved for the level 30?
Yeah, level 30 for sure. Yeah. No, I mean I'm being facetious, of course. No, I think there's a certain amount of introspection or soul searching in the functional programming community, saying, why is this not the default? Why is this not the mainstream? Maybe it's just time. Maybe it just requires enough of a critical mass to build up or enough people to be exposed to it. Certainly, I think a lot of the FP principles are making their way into all of the mainstream languages. And so, to an extent, everyone's going to be a functional programmer. But I think, it does have a lot of benefits to offer even beginning level programmers. I can't tell you the number of hours I lost to race conditions, mysteriously changing variables, deadlocks, all of the concurrency problems that you expect to experience. And I probably left behind some horrifically gnarly dependencies because I wouldn't have thought about, building a function that can take any function from int to int, right? I would have thought about, well, this class knows that class, which knows that class. And, there's a point where you sort of are impressed with your own ability to hold a lot of complexity in your head. And then hopefully you evolve past that and realize, no, the true mastery is not needing to hold that complexity in your head.
But I'm thinking of the chief architect for Java. His name is.
Do you mean Brian Getz? or
Brian Getz, right, and his amazing book, Concurrency, Java
Java
Concurrency.
concurrency in practice.
Oh my God. I gotta
Yes.
tell you, after I read that book, I was so frightened. I learned. I actually came from some background in concurrent programming. I thought I knew a lot about concurrent programming. Then I read his book, and I cannot tell you how many.
I had the same experience.
Where these questions of like, oh my God, I had no idea something actually worked this way. And then that feeling of how many times did I make this mistake that's now planted somewhere that will get triggered. So totally resonate with that. Karen, how about you? Is functional, to what extent does functional programming, is it accessible, should be accessible to junior programmers?
Yeah, I think so. I think the only reason why people have trouble with it at first is because it's a completely different mindset and looking at the world, and that's hard to transition to. But I've talked to people that their first exposure to programming was functional programming, and they actually have a hard time trying to then do object-oriented programming. So I don't think there's anything intrinsically hard about it. I think it's just that transition period of changing your mind to be more data-oriented and mutable over the object-oriented way of looking at the world.
But I had a sobering moment when my friend Cornelia Davis, she was talking about teaching her. It was working with her college son in college who was learning programming for like genetic sequencing, and it was an algorithm that could fit basically on one PowerPoint slide. And she noticed a bug that he had introduced just on iteration, and it was an off by one error. Right? And that was a very sobering moment for me in terms of like just how fraught with errors even things like iteration are, and that there's actually a better way to do things. So we've talked about some things that causes better ways of working, better ways of thinking. So how does someone bring a better way of working and thinking into their daily work, which might be at the mercy of too many committees, managers who are quite happy to do things the way they've always done. Can you talk a little bit about how do leaders at all levels bring in better ways of thinking and doing into daily work? Mike, you had mentioned that. Sometimes I take someone from the outside to see how savage and inhumane certain working situations are. How does one? We're here at QCon, where there are a lot of great ideas and forged through tough experiences. What advice would you give to people trying to introduce better ways of working? Mike, I see you nodding, so we'll go to you first.
All right. Well, I think the more locally you can begin, the better. So if you're trying to bring in an idea that requires the whole company to get on board, you're not going to get very far unless it's a 5-person startup. Neil Ford used to talk about bringing closure into organizations as just a jar file for a dependency for better unit tests, right? And so you'd sort of bring it in at a level where it doesn't require a lot of approval because you're not changing the production runtime. It's still the JVM. You're not changing the language that the production app is written in. So you don't need new linters or new syntax checkers or formatters or build tools or anything like that. But you are giving people a taste of where you can derive some real benefit and get some expressivity out of it. If you're in a team where you control more of your own runtime environment, you're in a more DevOps style, you build it, you run it type of environment, then you might say, within our boundaries, we're going to try out a new technique, a new language, a new architecture, but we're going to maintain all of our interfaces the same way, so we don't require sign-off or agreement from the parties on the other sides. I sort of view it as try and get that seed crystal going in a way that doesn't trigger the organizational antibodies.
Right.
As you do that, you also look for allies. You build your Rebel Alliance meeting at the beach bar at 5 o'clock every Thursday or whatever, and look for executives who have some enlightenment and can offer support for your Rebel Alliance and help provide them some shielding and some air cover as you start to make larger changes.
That's awesome.
Of course, be aware that you're not the only party introducing changes, and other people are introducing their own waves of change simultaneously to yours, and how they intersect and overlap and constructively or destructively reinforce each other can matter a lot. So keep your eye out for that. Don't try and stop all of the others, because they may be making improvements too, and you'd rather have allies than enemies. So, sort of build that network for change laterally.
I love that notion of the other insurgent team. I heard at the DevOps Enterprise Summit 2 weeks ago, the only thing worse than one DevOps team is two DevOps teams, right? Who are all clamoring for attention, trying to do the right thing. Karen, how about you?
Yeah, so I usually, well, at least in my position now, I'm working on a much smaller team, so we don't have to deal with a lot of the organizational complexity. But I think some of the same fundamentals are true, and that's communication, trust, respect, and feedback within people, because fast feedback is not only with your REPL and not only with your program, it's with the people in the organization as well. So, there's various techniques to do that. If you want to explore a different way of looking or doing something, maybe you could do a lunch and learn. So you can present your idea, educate people on it, get their feeling of it. Is it something that you want to invest in, like a spike day? That's just one day that you make some goals that you're going to spike something out and see if it has potential. Then share those results with everybody else, get feedback again. There's various ways that you can do this in an incremental fashion. But again, feedback is not only for the REPL, it's for people in the organization too.
In fact, can you talk a little bit about what people's reactions were when you fixed that terrible jar file, long build time plus jar file corruption? As if long build times weren't enough. 7 minutes, terrible. When you actually finally fixed the problem, what were people's reactions?
We're all remote, like most people now, and in Slack there were many gifs of rejoicing. So that's how we celebrated. But yeah, celebrated wins too. That really that helps everyone.
And I have to imagine this is exactly the kind of reaction that one would hope for, right? That positively reinforces that brave and initially thankless task of mucking with the build system in the guts of Docker build to maybe skepticism to genuine appreciation as everyone's benefiting from this improvement that you had made.
Right. And that goes also to new techniques. One of the things we were talking about, blending Python and Clojure, using a bridge. So we're using like a Python library to do some differential privacy. So that was a new technique we were introducing in the organization. So we did that with, research, lunch and learn, do a spike day. Is it good? Then develop it out and assess the results. So there's a whole, that's a technique that you can use with just about anything.
Oh, awesome. So I had mentioned how excited I was just to hear about your perspectives on things that cause focus, flow, and joy. But one of the other things I wanted to learn from you is just what are you working on these days? What are you most passionate about now in programming? And given the fact that this is probably, I know, something that is inherently challenging, you both don't gravitate towards the easy. How would you recommend others to get into it? Who are also interested in this. So Karen, I've been dazzled by all the work that you've been doing in the ML and the machine learning community, and then this incredibly audacious project to bridge the worlds of the JVM Clojure and Python, which when I first heard about it, my first reaction was like, that'll never work. And yet it's just to see all the achievements coming out of this group of people has just been dazzling. So Karen, what are you most passionate about these days?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm very much into the machine learning and data science combining with the Clojure, and that takes a blending of worlds, because there's a lot of specialized libraries out there that are available in Python, And traditionally, it's very hard to meld those two worlds. But there is this library that was created by a very smart guy, Chris Neurenberger, called libpython CLJ, that allows you to actually bring Python into your REPL and be able to use that library, and then also have the same advantages of being able to integrate it into your larger Clojure infrastructure. So I think that's really the best of both worlds, that you can, and it's very much with the Clojure philosophy of being pragmatic. You're powerful, but then you want to get the job done. So yeah, we've used that with differential privacy at Reify Health, and we're also looking at using various other data science techniques to improve the speed of enrollment into drug trials.
Actually, and by the way, I'd be remiss if could you just say a little bit what Reify Health does, because in this age, I can't think of a more noble mission than what you're working on these days.
Yeah, they're it's really an exciting place, meaningful right now, especially. So Reify Health has an application that is aimed at addressing the first bottleneck in a clinical trial, which is getting enough people enrolled. And we all know, we've been all watching, are enough people enrolled yet? We want this vaccine. So that's one of the things. We're involved in some COVID trials. We're also, cancer treatments. So all aimed at trying to get cures to people faster.
I've got chills just hearing about that. Yeah, that is amazing. So all these sort of breakthroughs that you're talking about are in service of these missions that you're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm on the data team, which is a new team that's kind of been formed to build out our data pipeline and be able to bring in all these data science techniques to accelerate this.
Yeah, awesome. Mike, how about you? What are you most passionate about these days?
Well, for the day job, we are taking a 50-year-old company that started with a mainframe. In fact, the name of the company was originally just the name of the machine. And we're getting off of the mainframe and moving everything to cloud. That includes the engines that power most travel searches that you execute today. So if you go onto the popular online websites, if you engage with the travel agencies or the corporate booking agencies, that's using our flight search, travel search technology. And it is, it's a company with a long and rich history, which can, have good and bad aspects, or hindering and helping aspects. Mm-hmm. So we're moving all of that to Google Cloud, and re-architecting a lot of it along the way. That's the day job. I mostly am working at that sort of nexus of organization and technology. I don't do a lot of hands-on coding during the day job. So to keep myself sort of grounded and sane in the off hours, my passion is doing Rust on bare metal, and sort of stripping away all the layers of complexity as far as possible, down to, I'm booting into some Rust code.
Awesome. And is there a particular goal that is driving you to this area of interest? Well,
I mean, I got my start on 8-bit microcomputers, where you knew where all the registers were and kind of had direct control over all of the memory. So partly it's for fun, but partly it's also because I think in some areas we have built up a Jenga tower of complexity for solving general purpose problems, but we have some specialized problems that may admit specialized solutions, and gain pretty significant benefits from stripping away some of the complexity.
Awesome. Well, so I would love to end with just a question to both of you. One is, is there any advice that you would give this community here at QCon? And is there any help that you're looking for? Karen, advice and help you're looking for.
Yeah, so the advice is, I guess, have fun. That's my, you can bring fun into your daily job and, with your coworkers. So whatever you're doing during the day, try to bring a little fun into it. And help that I'm looking for, yeah, I'm always looking for good ideas. So if you have any good ideas, data science, or especially machine learning, or any interesting articles that you think I ought to be aware of, please pass them my way.
Awesome. Mike, how about you? Advice you would give and help you're looking for?
Well, I love Karen's advice so much. I'd love to just say ditto on that. Fun and whimsy is sadly lacking this year. You know, we've all gone remote. We're largely isolated from each other and from the world. You know, one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten recently is get outdoors, reconnect with nature. You know, it doesn't have to be around people. You know, get around plants. You can't get COVID from plants, I think. I'm not a medical expert. Don't quote me on that. But you know, stay grounded. We work in a lot of abstractions and with a lot of abstractions, and sometimes we can lose sight of the real physical world that's happening all around us. So that would be my advice.
Awesome. Well, I must say, I am personally, I have a big smile on my face. Literally, my cheeks hurt from smiling so much, and I think the reason is I know that the reason is that I've had such a fun time interviewing you, and the only reason why I said yes to Randy Schaub is because he said that it'd be great to do this in a panel format with two people whose achievements and advice that I've loved so much. Karen Meyer, thank you so much. Mike Nygaard, thank you so much.
Thanks, Gene. Glad to be here.
Thank you.
From all of us here at QCon, we'll see you next time.